Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bald Move Pulp Feed. We got another great movie for you. It's 2010 Scott Pilgrim, and this is the ultra sexy 10-year anniversary version of the Scott Pilgrim podcast. On August 13th, 2010, the Scott Pilgrim versus the world was unleashed upon an unsuspecting the world. And you know what? The world didn't appreciate it. The world said, fuck you and your $80 million expensive pop culture reference laden hipster film. I don't want none of it, and it bombed out at the box office.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Edgar Wright had to go out into the streets and just start punching people to make money back for this movie.
Yeah. He had to convert corpses to coin, and barely made it back. Mm-hmm. And it's a damn shame because this thing, was a graphic novel series that was, I don't think, finished at the time. So this might have, really affected the fates of that poor Canadian gentleman. It was a video game, which I really, really liked, but it never got an update, nor did it ever make it onto like the modern machines of its day, because probably this movie bombed. And I own the Blu-ray, but it's a very bare bones copy. So you essentially got a director's commentary, some hastily thrown together blooper reels and trailers, and that's it. And I'm sure it would have gotten a lot more love had this been a big hit. So maybe we can talk about why it didn't.
Yeah, there was supposed to be a 4K re-release coming out now, and they were doing some stuff around it. Like they did a live table read of the script recently, like in the last week or so. And they were going to re-release the movie, but then coronavirus. So
this movie's cursed, but because this movie has become kind of a cult classic, it has found an audience in home video and other ways. But we'll talk about this. But yeah, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World 2010 is directed by Edgar Wright, which everyone knows Edgar Wright. He's famous for his Coronado trilogy of Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End, as well as Baby Driver. Very cool. It's written by Michael Bacall and Edgar Wright. It's based on the graphic novel series Scott Pilgrim, by Brian Lee O'Malley, a Canadian artist, and it stars so many people who have since blown up. Michael Cera, George Michael from Arrested Development, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who thrilled us all in season 3 of Fargo, has done a lot of excellent work lately, honestly. Yeah. Ellen Wong, which I haven't seen her in anything much except for this, except for I guess she was in Glow, which you've seen several seasons of.
Yeah, she's one of the wrestlers in that.
Macaulay's brother, Kieran Culkin, the bedwetter from Home Alone 1 and 2.
Other than that, this is the first time I had seen him, which was kind of like, now that I know his thing, I'm like, oh, okay, this is just Kieran Culkin. But
he's really good.
He's great.
And then Chris Evans plays one of the Ramona Flowers' evil exes. Of course, he went on to fame as Captain America. He was essentially famous for being the shitty fireman on the shitty Fantastic Four at this point in his career. Anna Kendrick plays Scott's sister. Allison Pill plays one of his bandmates. I think this is one of her first roles. Brandon Routh, Superman himself, with vegan superpowers in this movie. Jason Schwartzman, we're on a little bit of a Jason Schwartzman kick, plays the G-Man, Gideon Graves. Brie Larson, this is Superhero Central. We didn't even know it at the time, but it's Superhero Central. Captain Marvel herself plays Natalie Envy Adams. Aubrey Plaza, before anyone knew who the fuck Aubrey Plaza was, has got a memorable cameo, not cameo, guest starring role, and Mae Whitman, who a lot of people know from Parenthood, but I know as Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Apparently,
she does a shitload of voice work.
She does
in tons of stuff.
She does. So this movie came out.
You're gonna just skip right over the other superhero in here. Thomas Jane as the Punisher.
Oh, I have that later in the. That was gonna. Thomas Jane. Yeah, and the guy from Westworld.
Clifton. What's his name? Charlie something Clifton Jr. I can't remember.
Yeah. God damn it. What's his
Collins? Clifton Collins Jr. That sounds right.
Yeah, Lawrence from Westworld.
Yeah.
They play the vegan cops.
Right.
And everyone's having a great time in this movie. It looks like it was a lot of fun to shoot. And I really like this movie. This movie came out. I didn't think like I know it got a lot of buzz at like Comic-Con, and it was like one of those kind of like internet famous movies. But at that point, like Snakes on a Plane had come out and been shitty. So I didn't really have a lot of expectations, but I saw this opening night. I'm pretty sure you were there and Cecily was there because Cecily and I were kind of dating on and off at this period of my life.
Huh.
And I was just blown away by just how breezy this film was, how much fun it was, and its visual audio design is just kind of off the charts.
The style.
It's just a lot of fun to look at.
Yeah, it's relentlessly stylish.
Yes, and it's all kind of like aimed at, you know, Gen Xers, millennial sense, you know, kind of hipster sensibility, but more of like a gamer kind of grunge rock sensibility that I really got into. And, you know, it's kind of like suburb Toronto, which I found mapped kind of neatly onto like my suburban Indiana kind of upbringing. So yeah, what did you think of this movie, Jim? 10 years later, and at the time,
I loved it. This was one of my favorite movies. I was in my late 20s when I saw this movie, and I felt a little bit like Scott Pilgrim, trying to figure out life and love and all that stuff. Probably a little bit late because of my stunted cult background, upbringing. And so like a lot of the themes and just a lot of the confusion that he feels and the uncertainty I identified with. Looking back on it 10 years later, I'm like, oh boy, this is a movie for young like early 20s people who are just trying to figure this shit out. And it's effective in that. Like, I think this is a really good movie still. There are very few parts of it that I look back on and just roll my eyes at. For the most part, the style holds up, and if you're in your, you know, late teens, early 20s, I think the messages, the themes, the troubles that Scott is dealing with still are relevant.
Yeah, it's funny. I watched this with my 13 going on 14-year-old, and I'm like, hey, I'm watching this movie. Do you want to? I think that was the deal I struck him. I was like, well, if you want to, because he had a day outing he wanted to do, and I'm like, well, I got to work. So do you want to like watch this with me for my job? Because I think he's like, well, what is it? And I'm like, it's Scott Pilgrim. He remembers like this is one of the first video games he ever played on the PlayStation 3, which I definitely want to talk about. And he's like, okay. He's like, well, is it cool? Is it slow? And I'm like, nah. He's like, you know, give it 10 minutes. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. Yeah, he ate it up. Although the thing that he took about is how cringe, you know, like some of Scott, the situation Scott finds himself in are like very, you want to crawl into a hole or a crack in a wall because he's just the social awkwardness and the social the stickiness that he gets himself into is pretty crazy. But it's also got a lot of fun. It's very funny. It's pretty action packed. I mean, they have fairly impressive Matrix style special effects laden fight scenes in these things.
Oh yeah.
And it was fun for him because he, you know, recognized almost all the cameos. Like, you know, it was fun for him to see a young Captain America, young Captain Marvel, Aubrey Plaza. He loves Parks and Rec. So like seeing like barely out of her teens Aubrey Plaza, all that stuff was a lot of fun for him. And it was fun for me too. So I feel like that, and a lot of the messaging is pretty good. You know, like Scott is not living a very perfect life, and he's making a lot of mistakes. But that's part of the message of the movie is learning how to be true to yourself, learning how to be true to your friends.
And that by being true to yourself and being honest with people, you can actually be better to them, right? Like it seems like there's this dichotomy between, oh, I got to lie to this person to make them feel good, but if you do that, you actually make them feel bad in the long run. So
right. Yeah. And they express it in terms of like leveling up. There's this video game aesthetic where like every time Scott has a self-realization, he gains a new weapon or an extra life, or like his stats visibly increase on the screen, and all that stuff is, I think, pretty neat. There's been a lot. I read many essays about the importance of this film in what they call the transmedia movement, which is using various forms of mass media to tell stories. Sometimes it can be like, um, you know, a movie that also has a video game where plot is important that then leads to a sequel that's based on the video games. It's just like you're actually using multimedia to tell a story. Sometimes it can be like in this case, I guess this is like it checks off all the boxes. It itself is multimedia because, or a transmedia, because it uses video game aesthetics and music aesthetics to tell a conventional story, but also this story took place in a graphic novel and in a video game of the same title. And they all kind of like complement each other, and feed into each other's sensibilities. Like Scott Pilgrim defeats someone in a video game, it turns into cash that you can use to upgrade his weapons and abilities. And in the movie, people burst into coins and points because that's what they do in the video game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like it. What do you want to? So should we talk about the premise of the film and then get into some spoilers?
Let's talk about the premise and then maybe how it was received.
Okay. So the premise of this film is Scott Pilgrim. He is a Canadian youth. He's 22 years old. He had a bad breakup last year with a girl who went on to become an international famous rock musician, which has destroyed his ego. He has been reduced to dating a 17-year-old high school student that all of his friends rag on him for. He's in a band that's kind of floundering. He's between jobs. And in the midst of this, in skates this fantastic woman, Ramona Flowers, who is a hyperspace capable Amazon delivery girl, American, which is, apparently extra juice for a Canadian, the exotic American from the South. And he sets his sights on wanting to date her. And to do so, he has to level up as a young man and figure out what's worth fighting for. And crucially, she has 7 evil ex-lovers that have banded together into a league to control her destiny dating life, and he has to defeat all 7 to win her hand in dating, because they don't do marriage. They're early 20s grunge people. They're not going to get married. Come on. And that's the movie.
Yeah, unfortunately, the movie was a big flop. It cost about $80+ million to make, and it only made about 48 of that back. It's literally the only movie that Edgar Wright has ever made that didn't make money, and didn't make a lot of money. Honestly, like so many of his movies did like a $6 million budget, and he made 60 million or something. Or the latest World's End, he had a budget in the tens of millions and made over 200 and something million. So like this is kind of the exception in his career. Or I'm sorry, that was Baby Driver. I don't know why this movie flopped so hard. I don't know if it was the niche of this being a comic that people just weren't familiar with. And that maybe Edgar Wright wasn't quite as big then as he is now. So he couldn't sell it on his name alone.
Yeah, but this was so huge this is, I remember when this bombed, that the conventional wisdom was starting to come around to like, well, you can't market things on the internet. If you're big on the internet, it just doesn't because like, look at Snakes on a Plane, look at Scott Pilgrim. Like, yeah, you can fill an auditorium at Comic-Con with 10,000 screaming people, and that's exactly how many tickets you'll sell. Because the other thing is like, the Universal got behind this. They spent a lot of money marketing it. It was, that's how I heard about it, because I wasn't on the Comic-Con circuit back then. They developed a video game based on it. It was already a successful graphic novel that had done well in the comic book stores. I don't know. I really don't know why. Because if you were excited about this based on like your internet participation, this movie is exactly what it said it was going to be and exactly what it said it was going to do, and succeeded. It was commercially or critically a success. Like it, I think right now it has like 83% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and I believe that score was even higher back in the day. I am puzzled. I tried to read a lot of like, there's a lot of people saying, well, maybe we didn't market too well. I guess the international marketing is marketed as like a kid's film, because
Oh.
of like the video game aesthetic and all that, like a lot of animation kind of reads like childish.
Okay.
But
It's like that
it
era's Pixels or something, like, or
yeah,
Wreck-It Ralph.
yeah, but like this I guess this is YA at its core,
Yeah,
you
I would
know,
say. It,
and maybe that hadn't blown up yet because something like this made about teenage, like late teens and early 20 something, that's your bread and butter.
yeah.
um I can't figure out why this wasn't a big hit. I'm glad it's become a cult hit since, but I really don't. All the reasoning for why it failed, as far as its ad campaigns and stuff, as someone who went through it contemporarily, I don't know. I don't know why it failed so hard, but it did.
I do feel like when this movie was released, pop culture as like on the internet was still building, and I think it's still building
For
today.
sure.
You know, it isn't what it was, or it wasn't then what it is now. Like you didn't have hits on the level of like Avengers that would be out there making $1.5 billion or whatever, based on
Right.
the popularity and the buzz on the internet. Because the mainstream, I think, was still, you know, watching pretty standard movies, non nichey movies. Even the younger people were still very much like just not like that bought into like pop culture is exploding on the internet. Um, I mean, you look at that, that's around the time the bald move started.
Mm-hmm.
And television criticism on the internet was almost non-existent in podcast form.
Sure.
It was like us and a handful of other outlets doing
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, and so I just don't think like the traction was there for a purely internet based like type of thing.
The virality just wasn't for something like this.
Yeah, like that's the era when on YouTube virality still meant like you're doing a stupid thing with a dumb hat and a
Right.
cat or something, and your
Yeah.
mom and your cousin are watching it and they've never heard of Scott Pilgrim. Nowadays it's like,
Right.
you know, the virality means a totally different thing.
Right. Right.
And then there's that manufactured virality to stuff as well.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think the internet was just not ready to support something like this. And I don't know that Scott Pilgrim was like the most popular geek property either. Like it was
Oh
big
no.
in like comic circles and alternative comics and stuff. And I had heard of it
Mm-hmm.
in passing, but I was not a fan of Scott Pilgrim the comic. I just thought this movie
Right.
looked really cool, and I knew that, hey, this is the guy that did Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah. 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 I do think that like uh, 10 years later, how do we feel about Michael Cera? Because I do feel like he's very good at the socially awkward parts of Scott Pilgrim. Because
Uh-huh.
I haven't read all the graphic novels, but I read like the first four. And you know, Scott's like just essentially a normal dude, but he's like a really good fighter for whatever reason. And he's just kind of like a regular guy. And I feel like Michael Cera is several notches below what I would call a regular guy. And he does really good at the socially awkward stuff, but he doesn't do very good at like the intrinsic charm that Scott Pilgrim's supposed to have. You know, he's supposed to be a lady killer, like accidentally. He's just like, you know, very good looking, talented, and has got this natural kind of confidence and charisma about him that might be
Hmm.
temporarily tarnished because of, you know, having his heart stomped out by envy. But Michael Cera is utterly unconvincing in all of the stunt work. You know, he doesn't look like, and I'm not saying he needed to be like a big muscle bound dude, but
Yeah, yeah.
like he looks like he would hurt himself doing those stunts. And that's the thing that kind of jumped out at me. It's just that
Huh.
yeah, he's just very, and I guess it helps that in most of the fights where he's outmatched. Like I don't buy that he can beat Superman or Captain America.
Yeah.
He defeats him through trickery and guile. Um, but yeah, I don't know. There's a couple times where he has to have a little bit of swagger to him, and I felt like those parts fell flat. Like the movie works best when it's kicking him, and when he is like a champion, then it's kind of like womp womp. But I don't
Yeah.
know that that's a fatal error.
No, no, I still uh so I'm not familiar with like the characteristics of Scott Pilgrim. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of the
Mhm.
comic. And so to me, I wasn't noticing those problems that the probably fans of the comics might have had with this movie, but I thought he was good. I like Michael Cera for what he is, and I don't know that I need him to be much more than that.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out why like people saw these trailers and just like, nah, fuck this movie.
Yeah.
Um, because I think the rest of the cast, like Mary Elizabeth Winstead, is got all those kind of like boxes checked for this like alt girl fantasy. And she's
Right.
extremely attractive. She's extremely charismatic. She does have this like I don't give a shit what you think about me kind of
Yeah.
thing, and like also just more of a she's like Scott Pilgrim after the film. Like the sequel to this, Ramona Flowers versus the World, probably looks a lot like Scott, where she's just kind of blundering through people's lives and breaking people's hearts and not being really careful and not thinking about what she's doing as far as like building blocks of her life.
Hmm.
But she's entering this movie much more self assured and knowing what she wants, or at least knowing what she doesn't want, and moving confidently to get it. And she's just completely rock solid in that role.
Yeah.
She's excellent, and all of Scott's like the people that orbit him are just such amazing characters. Like Kieran Culkin as his gay roommate is, I think might be the best part of this film.
He might be. I mean, he's kind of the best part of anything he's in. But I would say,
Yeah.
like, okay, if you're gonna pick at Michael Cera for being for only being able to portray this nerdy guy and not other aspects, well, you
Mhm.
got to pick at Kieran Culkin because he's not acting in this movie, right? Like they're giving him lines and he's just saying them. Like he could have shown up on set that day, just read them as Kieran Culkin and been done, gone home, right? Everything I've seen him in,
But
he's been exactly this character.
just the physical acting, like I love the scene where he comes in, he's like, guess who's drunk? And then he flips his keys, hits him in the back of the head, and just collapses into the bed.
It's
And the
it's
running
amazing. Yeah.
and the running gag of him like spilling Scott's beans the second he gets them, like
Even
where
when
he's
he's
like, how did you do?
unconscious.
Yeah, and you see him unconscious, but he's got the phone in his hand, and like I face down in the mattress. I just love that shit. I love the recurring motif of Scott waking up with a nightmare, and then Kieran Culkin waking up and asking what's wrong, and then like his succession of boyfriends sitting
Uh-huh.
up and be like, "What do we do?"
Oh yeah, it's
I
not a
thought
knock against Kieran. I love Kieran. I love Jeff Goldblum. I love a lot of character actors who
Sure.
are, or not even character actors, who are hardly even actors. They're just people who are extremely charismatic and a joy to watch. There's nothing wrong with that.
I thought Anna Kendrick was really good as a sister. I thought Aubrey Plaza was really good as Julie Powers.
Mm-hmm.
Like that little thing, because this is a PG-13. Does it have a single fuck in it?
I
But
don't
the
think
device
so.
the device they have of her, like her mouth pixelating and the line noise going over all of her like filthy mouth, I love. And Aubrey Plaza is the perfect person to have in that role. And I haven't seen a lot that I like Brie Larson in, to be honest. And I don't like Captain Marvel. Not because I hate women, just because I think Captain Marvel is not a great addition to the Marvel pantheon at this stage of the Marvel. And then she's barely anyway.
Hmm.
She's amazing in this film. Like what she's
Yeah.
doing as this kind of like sex pot pop star, like this with this breadth, the appeal, and how her and like Brandon Routh have got those synchronized like withering stares that they give people. They snap and the camera follows them. And it all works together, like the editing, the camera work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like practical camera work that they do where actors are like popping up and into a snap focus as the camera pans to some other reaction. It's just really this frantic style that adds and props up the humor that's on display.
Oh yeah, and it's Edgar Wright through and through. Like you can feel the momentum
Yes.
of Edgar Wright's directing. Edgar Wright's cinematography. I don't know who the cinematographer on this is, but they did a fantastic job. And I don't understand how you can even do this. You have to have such a clear vision of what you want to get these shots. Especially, I'm thinking of the parts where he's jumping around between scenes. Like, I don't know if he's losing time because he's thinking about Ramona Flowers or what, but like,
Right.
he'll be 1 minute in his secret lair with Kieran Culkin, and he'll be mid sentence talking to him, and then he jumps to like a club, or he jumps to the coffee shop or the record store. Yeah,
yeah.
You have to know exactly what you want out of that entire series of shots before you even put a person on set, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I looked at there's one article I read that had some storyboarding where it looked just like shots right out of the graphic novel, and I'm like, you got this shot out of this, because it's not just all the camera work you're doing and the editing that is going to have to take place, but all of the post-processing. Because damn near every frame on here has some kind of rendering, some kind of like extra punch to it. Like even when like one of my favorite scenes is like the first time the movie gets really this surrealist, when they're selling the idea that Knives Chow is being exposed to cool music for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And like the living room stretches out, and like you can see like these like waves of like Technicolor power start to emanate from the band as they start playing. It's almost like this old like Max Fleischmann Superman cartoon effects, where like there's radio waves and stuff radiating out. It's just really cool, and you got to get the shot without any of that happening, and then know it's going to be there.
And Edgar Wright
he's a genius.
Yeah, he's amazing at this. And a lot of the tricks that I see in this movie, I know that he uses in his other films, like the Cornetto trilogy specifically. But he's using them in slightly different ways here. I'm thinking of like scenes in the bathroom where Scott Pilgrim is like using the bathroom and washing his hands, right? You got the pee bar in the back that drains just almost instantly. He walks over the sink, turns on and off the water, gets his hands, just
kind of waves his hands and
waves his hands on the towels and walks out. And it's like a maximum 5-second shot. And I remember like similar scenes from like Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz or something, where people are in the bathrooms getting ready, and it's a lot of like quick cuts between these things happening. So he's doing like similar things and has a similar momentum, but he's using different editing styles and tricks to get it roughly the same feel. And I think that's good, right? Because he could fall into the trap of just doing the same thing over and over, but I think Edgar Wright is better than that.
Yeah, and I talked some shit about Michael Cera, but I'm going to defend him, because what he's really good at is his comic timing for all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like him being able to get all that bathroom stuff done. Him able to sell like how smooth he is with the 17-year-old, and how the exact same shtick just gets him destroyed when he tries to run that game on Ramona Flowers.
Yeah.
Him sliding into the frame and starting up with like, do you know why Pac-Man's called Paku Paku? And he's really, really good at that. And, since that's 75% of what Scott Pilgrim has to do in this movie, it really, really works. Also, I think one of the worst things about media that's about something that's not, like, we talked about this, Mad Men may be an exception, because I thought most of their fake ad campaigns are pretty good. But a lot of times when you got a movie about a band, the music sucks because these are filmmakers. They're not, maybe they play guitar on the side or whatever. But Michael Cera, I guess, is a really talented bassist. And the other people in, like Allison Pill on drums, they all went to band camp and learned how to play convincingly on screen. And crucially, they hired actual professional musicians to come up with the music for the bands they're playing. And what I thought was a really good touch that shows a really good attention to detail is like they got Beck to write all the music for Scott Pilgrim's bands, the Sex Bombs, but they got a different band. Like they had the producer of Radiohead do the music for the Japanese Twins.
Okay.
And they had another indie band that produced the music for Crash at the Demon Head. So like, not only did you get professional musicians of the style that these bands would to write actual songs that could plausibly chart, but you hired several different ones, because like what Edgar Wright said in interviews, like, a lot of times when you do this, you hire one composer and you can kind of tell. It's like if you had Beck write for 5 different bands, he would do a good job, but they'd all sound like Beck projects, right?
Sure.
By mixing it up, you actually felt like, oh, these are all these different musical styles that are of the era, that are contemporaneous, but they don't feel samey, and they also are legitimate jams. Like, a lot of the songs on here that are the fake songs are toe tappers,
Oh yeah.
No,
I like most
they go
of the
pretty
Sex
hard.
Bomb music. I feel like they should have given Beck a shot at writing the whole thing, because if there's any artist I can think of that's like cross genre like that, it's probably Beck. He's crazy.
Yeah. You compare like his Loser day to like Odelay and some of the later stuff. Like he definitely goes lots of different genres for sure.
Yeah. At least give him a shot. But
yeah,
you're right. That was a smart decision to get different feels for each of these bands, and crucially hiring people who write that type of music too. It's not just like, oh, we got different people to do these so they sound different, but like you don't want to bring John Williams in to try and write a Sex Bomb song, right?
No,
like
no,
a composer or something like that. You want a dude who's making grunge music.
Yeah. The other thing I thought was a really smart instinct is to capture, because there's a lot of fight scenes. That was one of the common criticisms of the movie, is that like if you're not into these kind of hyper surrealistic fight scenes, you probably got bored the third one in, and you still got four more.
Fair.
But he said that he wanted this to feel like an old time musical, like that these were hyper realism, but the universe itself did not acknowledge it. Like Gene Kelly in like Singing in the Rain, he does these amazing dance numbers and no one runs on camera at the end of it and is like, oh my God, that was fucking amazing. I can't believe we got to see something that cool. Like these giant, earth-shattering fights break out at clubs and destroy buildings, and everyone's just drinking their beer and eating their pizza.
Yeah.
Because that's not literally what's happening. It's establishing a mood and a conflict and an emotion that is bigger than what can be than real life can contain. But you're also supposed to understand that it's all, at the end, Gene Kelly's just dancing because he's in love with a girl and he doesn't care that he's getting rained on.
Yeah.
But, if you saw someone, I thought that was a really nice touch too. The fact that like all these take place in their own little reality, but they're also in our reality, and the way the background, like for example, Chris Evans does this crazy skate stunt where he wipes out at 400 kilometers at the end of this epic rail grind. At the end of it, the director is just like, cut, next, there's no like acknowledgement, like, oh my God, the star of our movie is just exploded into coins. Yeah. I like that. And it's also the juxtaposition of that is extremely funny. Mm-hmm. But you also get like ridiculously cool stuff. Like when I think one of the standout fights is when Ramona Flowers steps in to fight her ex-girlfriend. And they introduce the like, Ramona versus Mae Whitman, whatever her name is. And she pulls out that ridiculous hammer out of her purse.
Yeah.
And then the ninja girl's got this like whip belt. It's just really fucking visually cool.
Mm-hmm. And those all became weapons in the video game too, which I appreciated.
And the wire work is done really, really well. I own the Blu-ray of this, and I listened to the commentary, which is not super interesting. And I watched some of the like behind the scenes stuff. It's pretty bare bones, but like in the bloopers, you could see Jason Schwartzman in his like full wire fu rig. I mean, Jason Schwartzman and Michael Cera, not known for their stunt work, but
sure,
they are pretty convincing when they're doing it. And there's like all this digital processing. Like I don't know how they did the digital sword effects on Jason Schwartzman katana, purely digital katana, but it looks fucking cool. Mm-hmm. And it really sells that fight reality.
And their ability to blend the actor with what must be a stunt person, a stunt double, is impeccable. Like it's almost completely invisible. I could tell, when there was a stunt person in there, but only really because of how well the moves were performed. And I was like, well, there's no way Michael Cera just threw a roundhouse kick that looks like that. But when he spins back around, he's Michael Cera. He's not. There's not even a moment where I can see like, oh, that's the frame where they kicked back into Michael Cera's performance. It's really well done.
And I just like some of the other like very specific to this kind of slacker hipster culture, like all the various characters and the way they're dressed. I love like when Scott is infiltrating G-Man's hideout, the passwords are all like, oh, whatever, just like groans and dismissals. I love Vegan Edge, Brandon Routh, that when he's like in full vegan power mode and like he looks like he's gone Super Saiyan. And then when the vegan cops show up, first of all, Thomas Jane,
Yeah.
really fucking funny. And they're like depowering him, and they list his list of crimes, and it's like he ate gelato, he ate a half and half, and then he had just chicken parm.
One of my favorite
is,
lines in the whole thing is when he is like, gelato isn't vegan. He's like, it's milk and eggs, bitch.
Yeah, Thomas Jane, milk and eggs. He's like, gelato's not vegan. Then he's like, a chicken parm. Like, chicken's not vegan,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he gets depowered and destroyed.
That's my least favorite part of this movie is the vegan powers thing. Up until the vegan police show up.
Why don't you like it?
It's just real dumb. It's just real dumb. I don't even know where they're
Yeah,
getting this
that's
idea
true.
of like vegan powers from. Is this like a meme that I don't know about or something?
I think it's that vegans are a lot more accepted nowadays. But the early adopters of veganism, it's kind of like CrossFit. Like they couldn't stop talking about
they're
it
evangelists.
and how much better, like they're super healthy and, oh my God, my skin's never been better, and I'm dropping all this weight, and I'm getting better sleep, and my poops are more consistent. And it's like kind of like this vegan propaganda turned up to 11, to where you actually develop superpowers and precognition, and if you maintain this vegan edge. And it's just kind of like, I feel like it's aged kind of poorly, because like, I don't think vegans are as seen as nearly as insufferable now that more people are doing it, and it's not as special,
becoming
as it used
more
to be.
accepted. But it's perfect casting there, like casting Superman. Because don't forget, Brandon Routh was Superman back in those days. It's a really funny bit of casting, but I thought that's one of the dumber parts of the movie. But I'm looking at this through the lens of like, look, I've seen so many bad early 20s, like college coming of age kind of stories. I've seen so many done way worse than this. Like, this is actually a really stylish, slick, funny, not cringy version of that in almost every scene. So I don't want to take too much away from this movie by saying, oh, it's got this dumb part in it. Yeah, every movie does.
And like I said, as someone who sat down and watched with my 13-year-old, like, I didn't have to provide, like, a lot of coming age films, especially ones that are shot in the 80s and 90s. Like, you got to do a lot of like, this is actually not super cool what's happening.
Right.
I mean, there's definitely, like, Scott does a lot of stuff that's like not cool. Because like I said, 22-year-old dating a 17-year-old high school is sketchy, but the movie articulates why it's sketchy, and doesn't show that like Scott's cool for doing this. It shows that actually it's from a place of patheticness, that he is wanting a girl who's easy to impress, who doesn't have any like formative experiences, so that he can kind of just like coast through the relationship. And like the perils of trying to like lie, like as you said in the beginning, like in ostensibly to protect people's feelings and all, but also I felt like it also showed that like really what Scott's doing is just trying to be easy on himself. It's not that he necessarily cares that he doesn't want to hurt Knives, although that's definitely, but it's more of like, oh God, it's hard and uncomfortable. And all of his friends call him out for his bullshit. And, as he levels up and becomes more of a complete person, he stops doing that stuff. And in fact, I wish there was a little bit of time on the Nega Scott, because it's a funny joke that you think that, you have to do this mirror match.
Yeah.
And at the end, he just kind of like befriends his inner shadow, and they have a lot of things in common. Like, that's pretty funny, but I actually think that could have been a very interesting, like 3 or 5 minute scene too. Like him coming to grips with his insecurities and his self-doubts and his negative, his inner critic, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, for a coming age film where it's showing people realistically making mistakes and, kind of being callous with other people's feelings, it didn't have me like, oh fuck, having to provide a whole bunch of context so my teenager doesn't get the wrong idea, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, all the insecurity that Scott is showing, he maybe needs a win, he maybe needs some confidence boosting, and that's probably why he goes to the easy victories with dating a 17-year-old, but also like he's got some serious issues with like other people's baggage that he needs to deal with. Like Ramona's 7 evil exes is, obviously the prime example of that, but it's like I feel like that's a thing, when you're younger. It's very much like, oh, what is their past? What is their love
Sure.
life like before this? And oh,
Yeah.
how I'm gonna have to deal with their exes and all the baggage that comes
She
with
got
that.
some battle scars, dude. You know.
Right. As you get older, you just start to understand, look, everybody's got this. Everybody lives
Sure.
a life before you
Me
met
included.
them. Right,
Hmm.
you included. And I think, Scott starts to understand that a little bit when they're dealing with his ex. And I think like that's a pretty good message for people who are in this situation. Just understand that like yeah, people have baggage, and you will need to deal with that, but you got to do it in healthy ways. You can't be so over concerned with like living up to some perceived expectation that you think they have, something they want different from their past. You just need to be you, and things will sort themselves out.
Yeah. Oh man, and speaking of X's, I love the visual motifs of like those X's show up all over the place. And there's one scene where there was 6 X's, and I'm like, well, that's wild. They didn't have the 7th X, and then Scott rips off the X-Men patch from his shoulder and throws it on the ground, and there's the 7th X.
Yeah.
They do a lot of stuff like that. Like one of the funniest bloopers is Michael Cera trying to land that FedEx package into the trash can. It took him like 37 takes, dude, to get it. And it's just like, yeah, because it's kind of tricky. You're throwing it over your head, and you can't.
I mean, there are easier ways, right? Just throw it out of frame and then have somebody drop a package.
That's where I'm like, man, like, how many more takes does this have to get before they just do that? You know what? Throw it out of frame. We'll have someone with a ladder drop it in, and then we'll just fuck it and fix it in post because
movie magic.
Yeah, that scene. But there was like this like whole team of guys like retrieving the package, throwing it off the frame, hand it to a guy who can hand it, so they can just keep like bucket brigading, throwing these packages one after another.
Wow, it's like bailing a sinking ship or putting out a fire or something, right?
What else do we want to talk about movie wise? Because I kind of want to spend a couple minutes talking about the video game, which is honestly, unironically, one of my favorite like arcade style beat 'em ups of all time.
Yeah. Let's talk about
that. So this, first of all, this is an amazing kind of like 8-bit, 16-bit action game. It's only for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. It was never ported to any other platform, which I was surprised. I actually thought like, oh, there's probably a Steam port or something. I kind of had some nostalgia I wanted to play through it again. But it's real fun, and it's got music by the fantastic 8-bit artist Anna Managuchi, that you've never heard of. They used to provide us the theme music for the what'd you call it,
Blue Yonder
podcast, our very first podcast. Like the opening was their Helix Nebula. They did all the music for Scott Pilgrim, and it's amazing music. The 8-bit art is great. It's a lot. This is a beat 'em up in the same vein as like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Marvel's The Avengers, Double Dragon, Streets of Rage, Final Fight. Like you're just going through all these side-scrolling and vertically scrolling levels. You've got power attacks and light attacks. You can pick up weapons. You can throw people. You can perform special attacks on them. And the other thing is when you beat the piss out of people, they explode into Canadian currency. Like you've got the loonies and the stags and the beaver coins, and you get all this pocket change, and you can turn them in at various shops to upgrade your, like each character's got like, I think, strength, like heart, will, which directly boost your attack, your defense, and like your special attacks. And you can, I think, invest in books that gives you different attack techniques, and you can buy different weapons and whatnot. And it's just a really fun game. Like every single stage, like the overworld map is like a map of the suburb of Toronto, where it's got like, the bus stops and every place you go. You start off on Scott Street. You've got like, it uses the there's like secret levels, so you can unlock these hyperspace doors. If you know where to find them, they'll take you through these bonus stages. And it's just a really fun, it's just a really fun and nostalgic game to play. And it's one of the very first games that my son and I beat together. Like it's like Little Big Planet and Scott Pilgrim versus the World and Castle Crashers. I'm not sure which of those games we beat and in what order, but that was it. And Mega Man 2 on emulator. But it's if you got a PlayStation 3 or an Xbox 360 kicking around, it's worth the $5 to get this game and play through it. In fact, I played through it because I kind of got obsessed with upgrading all the characters. And you can play as Scott, Ramona, Kim, was it Stills? He's the talent. I think you can unlock Knives Chow too. Like if you defeat her, like he's an old man riding the bus, and if you defeat him in a certain way, you can unlock her as a playable character. And you can also like do tag team moves, like a super special attack where Scott can like call Knives in with a barrage of knives on the ground, and Scott can call in Ramona Flowers and she kisses him and does some kind of explosion. It's just really fun. It's a solid video game, and it's a damn shame this movie didn't make more money, because I think if it made its money back, they probably would have ported it to the PlayStation 4.
Yeah,
and
probably
the Xbone, and I would be playing. Or at least I'd have played it this week.
Like convert it to PC so that I could play it in any era, because like it being stuck on an old console really sucks.
Especially, I think the PlayStation 3 is also kind of infamously hard to emulate, right? Like it was like that crazy parallel RISC architecture that even though we have way more powerful machines, it's just very hard to emulate that. So maybe it's possible today, but I've never been able to get a good PlayStation 3 emulator.
My only complaint about that game,
check that out,
is that it kicked my ass. The game is hard.
It is very hard.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the because also that's the other thing is like you had to beat it in one go. You could use like the hyperspace tunnels to bypass things, kind of like in Mario, but you had to, like, if you got to the final stage, you had to get there. Once you ran out of lives, you had to start all. You could save, but like once you ran out of lives, that was it. So it's kind of, I think, designed to kick your ass, and you have to level up, and if you're struggling, go through some of the areas multiple times. But and plus the variety of enemies, like when you're fighting the Chris Evans guy, you have to fight a stuntman, and there's also dudes that are wearing green screen mocap suits that blend into the background until they come like screaming at you, and like director's assistants come at you with like swinging lights and shit. Like they're like when you fight Nega Scott, it's like set in a graveyard, and there's like zombie versions of the characters popping out of the ground. You got ninjas and samurais when you're trying to defeat the ninja girl. And like I think the Japanese twins eventually form a Voltron robot that you have to go to the rooftop to like defeat, like their individual hands and then their chest platforms and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
It's super. It's really fucking elaborate. They spent a lot of money and time on that game, and it's criminally underappreciated.
Yeah, we forgot to mention,
like Scott Pilgrim, the film.
Right. We forgot to mention how integrated, that the idea of a game is into Scott Pilgrim, because it's not just, the coins pop out of people, or there's like round one or whatever, which, did you know that's Bill Hader doing those voices? He's credited as the voice in this movie.
I did not. That's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. But the end of this movie, the battle with Gideon, he uses a game mechanic to defeat him, right? That one up that he grabs. He dies, and then he comes back with his one up, his extra life. And yeah, the movie is absolutely made for a time when gaming is getting big. It's always, I've always been a gamer, so I feel like gaming has always been a big thing, but it certainly hasn't. It was probably big before 2010 when this movie was made.
Sure. But it's gotten even bigger now.
But now, now it's just bleeding over into movies and novels and music and everything.
I remember it was some time ago, I think it was maybe about 10 years ago, that like video games make more money than Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it's not even close anymore. Like I read, what was it, that The Last of Us moved 4 million copies in its first weekend. Like if that was a film, it would make $1 billion in a single fucking weekend.
Yeah,
it's insane.
Half of this is probably on Rockstar's back. Like GTA and Red Dead sells so many freaking copies that.
Sure.
And Call of Duty, like.
Yeah, and like the EA games, like there's just so much, but like there's just like, like The Last of Us 2 doesn't have nearly the cultural significance that like the Avengers does. But when you're talking about the number of people playing it and how much money it's making, It's night and day.
Yeah.
It's insane how much money's going in that. So it's cool to see these crossovers, and not in kind of like, because I think other movies have tried to capitalize on that, like the movie Doom, had that infamous kind of like 4-minute first person sequence. It kind of sort of works, but this is just more of like, in the middle of the fight scene, you'll just see a hit combo racking up. And when you KO people, and it does the classic like Street Fighter KO, and
and it just kind of expects that you get it,
yeah,
and it's built around that. It's not like something that they said, oh well, this is a game movie, so shit, we got to do something game like, I don't know, let's strap a camera to somebody's head and do that. No, this is built from the ground up with gamers in mind, and I liked it.
It's just woven in organically, like you said. Even the P-bar, like there's so many things that are just like that, and like and also this they use like in a very comic book way, like when you go into Scott's apartment and you see that like Kieran Culkin, I can't remember his character's name, but he literally owns everything except for one shitty poster and Scott's actual coat. And then there's this, I forget this, someone used this word on Brandon Routh, where he's like, do you even know what that word means? He's like, yeah. And then like this something popped out of his head, says he doesn't. Or like there's other things like where Ramona throughout the whole film is constantly correcting. Scott's like, you're 7 evil ex-boyfriends. She's like 7 evil exes. And then like when he finally makes the realization that his girlfriend had a lesbian lover, it goes into his brain, and there's this tile that goes doesn't get it to gets it, and it just goes bing all the way over. I don't know, like I can see like my dad watching that, because you don't need to understand all these video game mechanics to like they enhance your appreciation. I can see them being annoying if you don't get it, but as a gamer and someone that likes that kind of frenetic editing style, because I love like cranked movies, man. Like the average cut scene is 0.25 seconds. The average length of a cut, like that stuff that's just like fucking moving, crazy shit happening all the time. I love that stuff, and Scott Pilgrim is probably the most accessible version of that. And still to this day, I can't think of a movie that does it better.
And then certainly less offensive than Crank.
Much less offensive than Crank. Holy shit. So that'll do it for our coverage of the 10th anniversary of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Next time on Bald Move Pulp Movies, we're going to be talking about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Do you know why? Because Bill and Ted are facing the music in late August, early September, and we want to get the cobwebs blown out of our brains on the Bill and Ted wavelength. So I'm looking forward to that. Hope you guys are too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.